Hello and welcome to another episode. In this episode, we'll be covering even more advanced techniques, like fixing an entire aspect of a model that's erroneous, and how to use Resolve to your advantage to not bin a model and buy a different, better one. The first step, now the intakes are glued together, they require more sanding to make flush. While applying the extra thin cement in the last episode did its job of making the two parts more flush, it wasn't 100% and required more sanding, which is fine, it was expected. But then upon dry fitting the intakes into the main fuselage, I noticed that these two lumps, where the wheel wells are, protrude into the gaps where the holes in the intakes are. Now, while this didn't seem likely, I thought it might be correct, but it seemed reasonable to do some research. And from these images, you can see that, oh yeah, no, that's not how the real thing is. It's important to remember you don't have to fix this if you don't want, but I'm going to. For one, because it's content, and for two, because I frankly feel this should never have been made like this. There are tons of ways they could have avoided this kind of mistake during the manufacturing process, yet they didn't, and I'm far too stubborn to let poor design beat me. So, how do we fix this? That's right, it's sanding. So the first thing I'm going to do is trim down basically all surfaces that might be affecting the fit. Throughout I am very careful to take small pieces off at a time, with a scalpel or with a file. However, throughout this entire process I am of the understanding that no matter how careful I am, at some point the plastic will run out and I will be cutting a hole, which is fine. If I do, I can always use filler and look at other places to trim plastic. I also occasionally coloured parts in with a felt tip. This is so when I dry fit parts together I could see what parts are impeding the parts fitting, air quotes, correctly by the ink that was left on the counterpart. This basically means that the ink left on the other part is what needs to be removed. Fortunately for me, at no point so far did I cut through the plastic. This shows that the manufacturers possibly could have made the parts thinner to accommodate a realistic intake. They could have even moulded the wheel wells into the air takes to avoid this issue. Problems like this really do confuse me. The aim of these models is to make them as realistic as possible, and yet this is such a threshold of error, I simply cannot begin to understand how they managed it. Anyway, this is another couple of hours, on top of the several hours it took to sand the imperfections. At this point, we're possibly only halfway through. I also added a piece of plastic in the gaps of the intakes, as they essentially shouldn't be there. As I was slowly shaving off more and more plastic and getting closer and closer to an ideal fit, I realised I could probably make it fit perfectly. I won't concentrate too much on filling it at this point for now, as getting it to fit is my priority. After this, I continue to shave and dry fit. Now that the intakes are sufficiently sanded and they now fit within the fuselage perfectly, I'm going to fill the gaps. For this I use Tamiya putty. To apply it, in lieu of actual spatulas, which are an added cost, I used an old, since blunted scalpel. Of course, though it's blunted, it's still important to be careful with it. This process is messy, and the putty does slightly melt the plastic during drying, so it's important to use it sparingly. I simply squeeze a small blob out at the end of the tube, scrape it up with the application tool, in this case the scalpel, and drag it across the gap that needs filling. As you can see, I'm not massively practiced at this and still leave a big mess. For this application, that's not too important. There are no details I would be covering, but on external parts of the model, with panel lines, being messy could be an issue, but it can always be fixed. To clean the putty off the tool, you can use hot water. In my craft corner, I don't have immediate access to hot water, so I decided to use wet and dry. The downside of this is that it will wear away the metal, slowly, but seeing as this is a defunct scalpel anyway, I'm not too bothered by this. I thought I would include this as it's not the proper way to do it, but it is still a way. Not a massive amount of information in this one, but it's important to remember you don't have to do all of this if you don't want to, or if you bought a good quality model to begin with. With that, I'll see you in the next one.